Welcome to official YouTube channel of School Leadership Academy. Today, I will talk of one of the key narratives of making school from a teaching organization to a learning organization. Schools are meant for learning, and for that, we have a best model available, that's pedagogical leadership for improving learning and learning outcomes in the schools of J&K. What is learning all about? Learning is meant for four things. One is learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. These are the core concepts of learning. And in our context, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations, are meant for that everyone has a right to education. And more importantly, equitable and a quality education. And for meeting that goal, we have a goal 4.7. And now, what is the paradigm shift which we are talking about? One is earlier teaching learning organizations were more of teacher centric, and now it has to be a learner centric. Second, earlier it was the teacher direction, now it has to be learner autonomy. It has to be a teacher as well as student has to be a learners. They have to be co-learners of a learning process. Third, it was a passive learning process. Teacher was delivering classes and students were listening. And this is the old paradigm. Now, active participation in the learning. Fifth, earlier learning was taking place only within the classrooms, within the four walls, and now it has to be in the wider social context. Earlier, knowledge was taken as a fixity. It was a given, but now knowledge evolves over a period of time. More importantly, knowledge is now multidisciplinary. Knowledge, it's a continuous lifelong process which Sustainable Development Goal 4.7 talks about. And if we start with the basic principles of national education policy, which is based on the learning and learning outcomes. And more importantly, policy talks about diversity and local context. That means knowledge not within the four walls, but wider social context. More importantly, policy talks about equity and inclusion. Policy talks about community participation, that's wider social context. Policy talks about integration of technology into the teaching learning process. Policy talks about, it gives emphasis on learning, not for exams, but for learning. It talks about the understanding, identifying unique capabilities of each child. Policy talks about the 21st century skills like critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, communication skills. It talks about the information, media, and technology skills. So, keeping these things into scenario, these are the core essentials of policy, which talks about the reduction in the curriculum, but focuses on learning, increasing learning and learning outcomes in the schools of J&K. Now, the focus of policy is completely on learning outcomes, because this is now the standard for we as system level functionaries, we as an educational system. If we are able to increase the learning outcomes, that means our education system, educational processes are functioning well. If not, then obviously, no. We have everything except learning in the schools. So that's why policy has completely focuses on competency-based approach of learning and learning outcomes. Policy talks about experiential learning. It's an innovative pedagogy meant for improving the learning outcomes. Policy talks about integrating pedagogy with art integrated, sports integrated. It has to be a burden-free pedagogy. And more importantly, collaborative learning, peer learning. Policy has also highlighted bagless days. It's focusing on burden-free education so that our learning outcomes improve. Now, these are some of the documents which have initially talks about the learning crisis, especially World Development Report 2018 clearly talks about the learning crisis, learning traps, learning poverty, which we have to collectively work on. Now, learning crisis has improved over a period of time, and it's now a wake-up call for all of us, especially school leaders, especially teachers. It's a wake-up call for all of us. So let's understand the learning crisis, especially not going deeper into the figures and data, but more importantly, one of the key findings is that 43% of teacher does not know the curricular goals. That's why I wrote it's a wake-up call. Definitely, its impact on the students. This is some of the findings from NAS, ISA reports, some of the findings from different independent studies about the different subject levels. And on an average, J&K has a low in terms of NAS results. It's a wake-up call. There is a learning crisis. Especially, we have taken the classes, class 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 10th, and there's a huge learning crisis, and it has increased by the pandemic. Now, this is the global scenario. This is the best report which I have seen on learning crisis. Overall, there's a huge chunk of population which is in the learning crisis trap. They are in the learning poverty. This is the term learning poverty estimates from different regions of the world. It's the best paper available on learning crisis. Now, these are the World Bank's report on learning crisis data, and it talks about over half of the children, that's 53% in the low and middle income countries, cannot read and understand the basic story after they complete their primary school. So that's why this crisis has increased over a period of time. This is the study conducted by the SCRT, and it also talks about the widening learning gaps between different types of students, different layers. And now what we need to do, even steps taken by the government of J&K to mitigate the learning crisis, there has been steps taken by the government of J&K, especially establishment of ICT labs and especially running the learning process during the pandemic period. But still, there is a lot more to do. And for that, there has been a teacher training has been conducted across India, across J&K, especially in the name of NISTA, for improving the learning levels of teachers, and obviously it will have a positive externality effect on the students. Similarly, in service B.Ed training project, as the project where almost 20,000 teachers have completed their B.Ed program. That will definitely is a step for under the RT, Right to Education Act. It's a step to improve the quality of education, and quality of education is obviously increasing learning and learning outcomes in the schools. But for we as a professionals in the educational process, we have one document with us, that's Pedagogical Leadership for Leading Learning in Schools. That's the best document, best guide for us if we have to really transform the schooling system, and the education system should meant for the satisfying the needs of the surrounding society. We should move beyond this examination, and we have one document called Pedagogical Leadership. It's a plan, annual pedagogical plan, how you can improve the learning levels of the students, those who have a low learning levels, those who have at least achieved some minimum standard of learning. So this document talks about the pedagogic process. It talks about we need to have a pedagogical leaders, and more importantly, who can transform the learning process in the schooling system. And this is the crux of the pedagogical plan. What it talks about, it's a framework which talks about the three layers. The first layer is we have to set the direction. We have to make school as a learning organization. Everything should support learning. Even infrastructure, physical, human resource, financial, they all are meant for setting the direction for improvement of student learning. And the second layer, it talks about we need to have a pedagogical leadership plan for a particular year, for a particular time period. And third, we have to assure about the students' outcomes. That's the check. Whatever we do, it should improve the learning outcomes. The first is we have to create school vision of a school as a learning organization. Second, we have to build a shared vision because school is led by the school leader, but it has a team. We have to build a shared vision. And more importantly, we have to set a specific, measurable goal. SMART goal is a basic acronym which talks about the specific, measurable. The goal should be specific, which you will be able to achieve in a particular time. And more importantly, as a school leader, what legacy you left after you leave the school. It should meant for increasing learning and learning outcome. And for me, if we are unable to give a good learning atmosphere, conducive atmosphere to students, it's a mere injustice as per the Right to Education Act. So now the second layer talks about we have to look after the professional development of teachers. It's a continuous process. And third, important is we have to initiate innovations in the learning process. And that's more important, leading innovations in the schooling system. And third most important process is we have to create a learning culture within the school so that the learning and the learning outcomes will increase over a period of time. And more importantly, the policy focuses on the inclusive culture where we have a different layers of students within the schooling system. It can be a gifted one, it can be a CWSN child, it can be a child with the low learning outcomes. So for that, we have to make classes an inclusive one, especially for girls, especially for the third gender. And we, as a leader, we have to be first. We should know self. We should develop self for leading learning and learning outcomes in the schools. And more importantly, after you do a kind of analysis, you keep some concerns of the school, you make a plan, pedagogical leadership plan, which is available online, which is available on the website, where you have kept the concern, you are the best person to solve those concerns. And more importantly, then you have to measure your success in terms of assuring learning outcomes. And for that, we have a tool called assessment tools of different levels. It should be based on competency-based approach. Before I will conclude, the part 2 of pedagogical leadership for leading learning and learning outcomes in the schools of J&K will be shared with you as soon. But more importantly, let's make school from a teaching organization to a learning organization. Our aim should be to improve learning and learning outcomes not only of students but more importantly teachers as well as students, and learning should take place in the wider social context. Thank you all, and let's work together for transforming schools from teaching organization to learning organization.